It's another episode of the Next Fix podcast. Today we've got Doug.
Very good, Ryan. Thanks for having me. And boy, what a great way to kind of wrap up a Thanksgiving holiday weekend and sharing it with someone else. And
yeah, man, we're
have
gonna
a lot
rock
to be
this
grateful
thing.
for.
There's a lot to be grateful for, and there is probably a time when maybe you weren't so grateful. I suspect that maybe you are a reformed scumbag. And that excites me because this is something that I carry that, I wave that flag proudly because I'm no longer that person. But I want to know when maybe the Doug I'm looking at wasn't ideal. What was that like for you?
It's funny because this morning I was just talking about that. One of my favorite traditions on Thanksgiving was, after drinking all day, was going out to the bars Thanksgiving night. There was just something about hitting the clubs on Thanksgiving night because,
Sure.
regular people didn't do that.
Right. I did. Right. And this is why I suspected we're cut from the same cloth, which is going to
fellow
make this
scumbag.
conversation great.
I love that.
Right, man. So when things were darkest, man, I guess, I want to know about that. Like, what did it look like?
Well, obviously there was a buildup to the darkness. And, one of the things I can look back at now was that I never realized was, first I was a quitter. I quitted everything I ever did. I quit in relationships. I quit in school. You name it, I quit. I always joked that when I was going to college, I was going to school full time, I was working full time, and I was partying full time. So, something had to give. So, of course, what do? You just drop out of college. So you continue to party and you needed the job to be able to party. So I end up, after dropping out of college, I went to school in the Midwest. I moved to Florida. My father owned a boat business down there. So I got in the boat business. This was in the 80s, the Miami Vice days.
Nice.
And it was crazy.
So when you say boat business, like, what are we talking about here? Like, just selling boats?
He was selling boats.
I'm in Florida. So,
where are you at?
I'm in Orlando.
Okay.
Less boats here, but I mean, when you say boats, you're talking about Miami Vice. What does my mind go to? Scarface in Miami.
Cigarette boats. So he owned a dry storage marina. So, he sold boats. So after I dropped out of college, I went down there and started working for him. And, I had big goals and dreams. I made a bet one time with a guy that I could go a year without putting pants on. So I went an entire year. I was a driven man. I had goals and dreams.
Right.
Yeah, I'd show up at Christmas in shorts. But it's Florida. You can get away with it.
If you can get away with it, this would be in an environment that, it actually could go unnoticed here, to be honest, in Florida.
I think I had to skip one formal dinner once because they wouldn't allow me in without shorts, but I was determined to win that $10 bet.
So you won it. Did you get it?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
All right. And I like to say I was living out my Jimmy Buffett song. But the fact was that after, the more every year, from probably age 13 up, every year I drank more, I drugged more, I searched. For me, the sweet spot was that moment right before you blacked out, right? You were just in that perfect moment. Hard place to hit because, most of us blow past it.
It's a very tiny window, and then
it's good, but it doesn't last long.
Right.
And I'd have friends who partied like I did. And of course, they'd go home at the end of the night, not me. I'd go all night. And so he eventually sold that marina. And together in Jupiter, Florida, we opened up a marine supply store. And it was there where I started to meet a lot of people who actually were drug runners, or they were mechanics for drug runners, or they were captains. And
sure.
So for a number of years, I had a pretty good gig going. I would have marine supplies. I would buy wholesale. And then some I'd sell, but most I would then trade for drugs. And so the story goes is I was in my late 20s and I was a liar. I was a thief, and I was stealing from this family business.
Sure. And I want to touch on something real quick, Niang, because like a very important thing that I've learned is that we find what we really want. Right. And so you had this propensity to be a scumbag, to find the party, to find the drugs. And what I had learned about myself is that you could drop me into any scenario and I will do just that. Right. And so you're amongst people that have boats, but who do you find? you find the mechanic that knows the drug runner from Cuba. And so it's amazing how we are able, when we have this like overarching goal or pursuit, and yours and mine, it happened to be where the party was, where were the narcotics, where were the drugs. And I could find cocaine in any type I could be on the middle of nowhere. I will smell it out. I will find it. And it's to me, like, it can be a superpower. And this is what I touch on quite often, but here you are. But to get back to your story, you're at this place where it is starting to ruin the family business as a result of your pursuit of this lifestyle and the narcotics and things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so my father, who was my business partner, he just couldn't figure out why we always had customers, we always had business, and we never had any money. And he was starting to start to question it. And it was in January, and I realized that the gig was up. He was wanting to meet with me on the Monday after Super Bowl, and let's talk about what's going on with this business. So I had a Super Bowl parties of all Super Bowl parties, and think I drank and drugged for about 24 hours straight. And then on Monday morning, I decided, I better get out of town. So I went to the bank when it opened and emptied out what little cash we had. And I went to the airport and I bought a one-way ticket. And all this was in a blackout. And so my moment of when, and you had asked that, kind of new Doug, old Doug, where was that pivot moment? And look, we all have a lot of pivot moments. We just, I like to always think like bottoms are like falling in a hole and you hit a ledge, and you can either stop there or you roll over, go deeper into the hole, hit the next ledge. And let me tell you, each ledge hurts, right?
Yeah.
It hurts us. It hurts those around us.
So just to touch, so it's Monday. You have the meeting with your father, what he thinks you're showing up for, but unbeknownst to him, you've already skipped town.
I've long gone, right? And this was back before the 9/11 days. You could pay cash for a one-way ticket. Nobody'd question, right?
Right.
So I get on this airplane. I decide, look, if you're going to, I was in Florida, and if I'm going to run away, where am I going to go? I'll just move to Hawaii. That makes sense. And there's this moment I'm passed out, and I'm kind of coming to, and yeah, that moment where you had such a hell of a night that you're kind of awake, but the eyes won't open. You're in a fog, and I'm in that fog, and all of a sudden I hear, "We'll be landing at Houston International," and I open my eyes, and I'm in the middle center seat of an airplane with no idea how I got there.
Okay.
Then I put my hand in my pocket, and there's a bunch of cash. And then it just kind of all came back to me that that the life I was living, I could no longer live. And I landed in Houston, and just so happened, it was just a connection to Hawaii. My brother lived there. And so I called him when I got there. My father was looking for me. And so it was that moment that I was like, I just, and again, I love the scumbag, it was bad enough that I was drinking and drugging, but I was stealing from my family to do that. I was stealing from my friends. If you and I bought a 12-pack together, I always got 7. You never got half.
Right.
And same with the cocaine,
Right.
heroin, you name it. You never got your share.
Sure.
And if I'd steal anything that wasn't nailed down. And I just realized at that moment that, man, I got to go back and face my father. And that was one of the hardest things in my life to do, was to go back and admit to him that I'd been stealing from him.
Yeah.
For my habit.
So, all right. There's a lot going on here, right? So you're in Houston, and you don't go to Hawaii. And for anybody who doesn't understand that, like, that come to where you're managing all this movement, you made a purchase, you're on a plane, and it's like, however, the bus is moving down the road, but there's nobody behind the wheel, right? The bus is just it's just
great analogy. Yes.
And so here you are, and I've had this too, where I'm like, what the hell? Like, it's like my consciousness kind of has like a just this moment of clarity, not much, but enough to say, damn, like, wait a second here. And so at this moment, you realize you got to go tell your father, which I'm imagining he probably knew more than you thought, right?
Yeah.
Like you thought you're getting away with a whole shit ton. You're like, and nobody knows, like I'm all doing all this, but I'm imagining that maybe he had known something, was like maybe not the specifics, but what did that conversation look?
Oh, it was a tough one. By the time I'd gotten back, he had dove deeper into the books, and he could realize, right, that I had hid from him how much we owed our biggest distributors. And and my father, he was a partier. He liked to party. But he didn't steal from somebody to make it happen. And so I had to go meet with him, fly back, long flight back. Never, I had no drinks while I was in Houston. I think I got high because I needed to take the edge off. And I went and met with him, and he was obviously upset. But he said, the key is we got to do something about it. And so he said a friend of his kid goes to this therapist. And I love telling this story. So he says, I need you to go see this therapist, and then we'll figure out what to do. So I go see this therapist, and he's also a hypnotist. And he's a little out there, but he says to me, he goes, look, I have a theory. I have a theory that alcoholics are warriors of the past, but there's no more wars to fight. And that's why they drink. And I'd like to hypnotize you and talk to that warrior. And I'm like, oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. I don't know what you're going to do when I'm hypnotized.
So you're thinking you're going to go under and be, right? And who knows what could happen?
Who knows? Maybe he's right. We were warriors of a former life. I don't know. I didn't want him talking to that warrior. Who knows what that warrior did, right? But he did say, you probably ought to quit drinking.
Right, right.
And that was the first time someone said to me, probably ought to quit drinking and drugging.
So all that time. And now you're also that also in that period of time. Where are we at here? What are we talking? Like mid 80s? What are we doing?
Yeah. So we're talking. I went to school mid 70s, all throughout the 80s.
It wasn't as damn cool. It's like sobriety's cool nowadays, but at that point in time, like, smoking cigarettes was still cool, right? Like it was like people weren't so quick.
Right.
They weren't so quick to say, this is your issue, man. It's this sauce. You're on the sauce and it's ripping you to pieces. People were a lot more hesitant to say that, right? It just was the truth. And so this is the first time this hypnotist therapist guy, right? And I love your voice too with him, by the way. Like I feel like I was there. So he tells you got to quit drinking. And this is like news to you. You're like, wow.
Maybe it's the first time I heard it, right? So because probably 4 years earlier, I'd gotten a DWI.
Okay.
It was actually Buddy and I were at home drinking and getting high, and we were actually watching television. And they say this is in West Palm Beach, and the police will be out looking for the holidays, be out looking for drunk drivers. And so we went, of course, out to the clubs, and I was trying to make a U-turn to get to a club. And when I went there was a cop car just parked there. And all of a sudden, that story came back to me. Oh, crap, they're looking for drunk drivers. So what do? I cut across 3 lanes of traffic to go park, right? If I hadn't seen the news story, I probably wouldn't have got caught. And the point of difference is, back then what they did is, when you went to DWI class, they taught you how to drink and drive. They taught you how to count. They taught you how to count your blood alcohol content so you wouldn't drink and drive again. That's so they actually thought you would sit in a bar or somewhere or someone's house.
Right.
Okay, I had a beer. I need to wait exactly 55 minutes because of my weight. And so I had that DWI, and you know what? I just chalked it up to bad luck. And it was bad luck. I'd seen that news story. I'm appalled at how many times I drank and drove.
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
man. I can't change that past.
Sure. Right. Like your flux capacitor kicks in and it's like 8 hours later and there's the car. Sometimes there's not the car. I've been in that scenario too, where I called the cops and told them my car was stolen. And they told me this, sorry to bring up an old story, but I was like, yeah, my car's been stolen. And they're like, well, we know that that's not true because we found it parked on a median filled with money and locked. And I was like, huh. And they were like,
those are dumb thieves.
They're like, if we find out you did anything bad, like if you ran into anything, it's gonna be on you. I was like, okay, wow, like, but anyway, now,
Hold on. Can I tell you one more story? Because it
yeah,
goes right along with that. I'm 19 years old, right? I can drink legally at that time. And my mother worked for the police department. And I had her car. And I was out drinking one night and I was trying to get up a snowy hill outside the back of a disco. So that tells you, right? And
yes,
I can't make it up the hill. So I'm like, oh, I'll just back up and then go. Well, I back up and I hit a car. I back into a car. So I take off and I go to the next bar and I was like, crap. I got a report that someone hit my car. So I called the police and they came out and they're like, you're Aura's boy, right? And again, she works for the police department, my mother. I'm like, yeah. And someone hit your car. We're sitting at the back of the car. And I go, yeah. I mean, look at the tail lights are shattered. The cop goes, so do you think they stopped and picked up all the pieces off the snow? Yeah, I bet they did. Nobody said I was bright when I drank. That's for sure.
right, right. And so, well, back to this therapist, yeah. All right, how did you get your shit together? How did that look like? Like, what
Yeah.
did you lean into? Was it the rooms? What was your what?
Yeah, look, I mean, to your point, it wasn't the first time somebody said something. I had a fiance. By the way, we got engaged because we weren't getting along. So I thought, hey, maybe if we get engaged, we'll get along better. That's alcoholic thinking if there ever was. And so a lot of people had said maybe you should do something about drinking. But them saying it and you hearing it and being ready to hear it, right? Two different things. So, I think it was at that moment, I just kind of knew I was probably done when that therapist said. So I did go to a 12-step meeting. And that first day, it was interesting because it was on the Intercoastal in Jupiter, Florida, beautiful location on a Sunday morning. And I was sitting there and I had no idea what was going on. But you saw these boats going by. And again, I had a boat and all that. And, I was kind of thinking, wow, there goes my old life. But I wasn't sure. Then a couple more meetings I went to. The thing that really changed for me was that there was some of my customers I ran into. One of them walked up and actually said, we've been waiting on you because,
Right.
I was just, you could tell I was half living in this store that I owned. But I think the thing that really saved my life is that I walked into this big room one night, bright, full of hundreds of people, and they were laughing. And this guy, Kenny, was telling his story. And he was talking about drinking and using in the hospital bed, and the people laughed. And of course, I'm appalled that they're laughing. But at that moment, I kind of thought, this is what, these, they're not drinking and drugging and they're happier than I am.
Interesting.
And if I'd gone to a kind of a meeting where people were dreading being sober or what have you, it probably wouldn't have worked. And
Yeah.
so I just saw that there's kind of this potential different life out there for me. Doesn't mean it wasn't easy. Doesn't mean I didn't want to drink.
Sure. But that experience allowed you to dig your heels in and really start getting traction with your recovery.
Yeah, I think that's when I kind of like, all right, again, you know, I had, well, I should say, right, I had all these issues. So, right, I had bankrupted the family business, which we ended up just having to sell it. I'd hurt so many people, and I was just full of so much remorse, right? I mean, I think, when you no longer have the drink and the drug to kill the feelings of the harm that you've done, and it's just there and it's so raw. And so I, I knew that I had to change. And then this guy said something, and there really were kind of two big moments. One moment is this guy this Kenny who had been actually speaking. He said to me about a week later, he kind of patted me on the back and he goes, Hey, Doug, this is pretty easy. Just don't drink and just change everything about yourself. And some people are
Easy.
insulted by that comment. But you know what? I didn't like the guy I was.
Okay.
So I was like,
Yeah.
change everything about yourself. And I could see that maybe I could move away from that last guy. But, look, also I went to these meetings because my father, that's what he wanted me to do, right? After I talked to the therapist and everything. So, I wasn't walked in and said, I'm all in, but I walked in and said, I'm open-minded.
Sure. Sure.
And that's all it took. So
Yeah.
kept coming.
But that's just I'm imagining, when you were told, just change everything about that person. I mean, in some ways, there's some simplicity to it, right? It's
Mm,
like just do the opposite of whatever the hell you were doing before.
and that's what they told me.
And so, well, the business wasn't there, right? So a lot of times when you're cut off from the resources that can, definitely change the way that you do things, because it's no longer even an option to perform things in the way that you were before. But well, tell me about the book, right? Because I'm pumped about the titles, What If, right? And so I want to hear your explanation of that title, and then of course the book as well.
Yeah. So before I get to that, there was also just kind of one moment that maybe share with those watching is, I had this guy, he said in a meeting once, he goes, you know what? He goes, I just used my lifetime allotment of drinking, my drinking allotment up. Hmm. All right. So I'm 28, 29 years old. I was like, okay, I used my lifetime allotment up. I'm done. And guys would say, no, 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 just for today. And I'd be like, no, I think I'm done. I used my lifetime allotment up. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't really struggling, right? I didn't know how to sleep. Remember learning how to try to sleep?
God, yeah, I mean, it's
All you did is pass out.
well, it's like the thirst or the desire to rest, like rest, right,
Mm,
was something. I mean, hell, I still struggle with it, right? Like I wouldn't say that I'm 100% comfortable in my own skin, despite doing things that maybe people that are like that do. I meditate. I listen to certain meditations, and I do certain things that you would imagine a peaceful person or a person comfortable in their own skin would do. I do them. However, I have this, an edge to me, and I think that I'm not alone here. It's
that-
like this little bit of anxiousness. And so a lot of my substance pursuit was in that ever longing desire to just rest, And so, yeah. And it's a tricky pursuit, because when you do pass out, to your point, it's not truly rest. You're not recovering in the least bit. And your mind thinks that just because it's not coherent, that you are resting. However, it couldn't be further from the truth.
point.
Yeah, that is, the allotment that we have, right? I can get on board with that type of an approach. But all of us just have this combination of approach or mindset or even logic that just, once you start putting it together, and I believe that we're all unique, it's all different for each
I
way.
agree.
Because I didn't go to the rooms. In fact, when you're mentioning that experience of all of these people, very pleasant, talking and laughing about their past experiences, mine was
Yeah.
I walked into a room, and man, it was like 25 super pissed off people because they're not drinking anymore. And I was like, huh. I'm like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I, left, no stone unturned. I went to a few meetings, and I was like, well, it didn't really click for me. And so had I been in a room like yourself where people were a little bit more positive, maybe it could have been a little different. But I do believe we all have a combination that really locks in. And so I'm glad that you found yours, right? And so,
Yeah, and I'm a big believer that right, the rooms is not the only way, right? I believe there's so many different ways, but between all of us and all the different ways, but what has to just make that moment, I believe, is this total surrender, right? When you surrender to the disease, whether it's in the halls, whether it's in a church, whether it's whatever kind of recovery, maybe it's whatever it works for you, but I just have to think there has to be this moment that just says, I'm done. Now I was really struggling with I was still getting high because I wasn't going to ever quit getting high. And, but I was really struggling with the desire to drink when I was trying to not drink. And this guy said to me, and this kind of sets the book up, and I didn't know it at the time, but he says, what if you just didn't have a drink or a drug today? And he didn't say, don't drink and drug today. He said, what if? And so what I kind of started, and this is 30 some years looking back look to see how all this connected. I mean, I didn't know it at the time, right? But again, he didn't tell me what to do. But what he was trying to do was to change and interrupt my thinking, my routine, and really see that there's something different. And that's really what the basis of the book is. It is start with what if, weekly questions to spark immediate change and growth. And so, what he did, and I use that word interrupted, right? He interrupted what was my normal thinking and said, what if you just today don't? And so, look, with what if questions, most people use it to look backwards,
Mm,
right? With regret. Well, or what if I had studied something else in college? What if I hadn't dropped out of college? What if I had married the person? What if I didn't marry the person? And so, but all I know is that when I look backwards, I can learn from it. But if I get stuck in it, I'm going nowhere in the day.
yeah.
And right. So what the book is based on is asking what if questions to move forward, whether it's in the moment, whether it's in your life, whether it's in your week, but to really start to question of your choices and your perspectives.
Sure. And you had mentioned people looking backwards with the what if, based in regret. And I also see people use the what if and they base it in fear. Well, what if that
Mm,
happens? What if this happens? What if I fail? What if nobody buys it? What if everybody thinks I'm stupid? What if somebody says something horrible? And I mean, to your point, we can choose to turn that upside down, and then this is something I say when I'm trying to get myself to interrupt my own thought patterns. I say, what if I could pull off a fucking miracle? Right? Like what if I can pull off a miracle? And so just looking at it in that state, gives it a lot of power. It has a lot of power. What if can be very powerful depending on which way you apply it.
absolutely.
And that's super cool that originally it was created to interrupt you because it interrupted me as well. I mean, even today, before we hopped on here, I was thinking about it. Right. So it all kind of the genesis of it all was that one conversation and it interrupted your thought patterns. And then maybe how did it develop?
Yeah. So, after I lost that business, I had to go get a job, and I went to work. You might remember the stores, the Sharper Image, and went for and here I am like, oh my gosh, I'm wearing a name tag. I'm in retail, and they had this grand opening of this mall, and I wanted to jump off the second floor. I'm like, well, if I go head first, maybe I'll die, right? And this is in sobriety, right?
Yeah.
Because I was in
Yeah.
such mental pain. But, where I thought I was moving backwards, oh my God, I was just moving forward in so many different ways. And so that job at Sharper Image moved me from Florida to Boston. And I moved to Boston just so I could watch the Celtics play. Bird, McHale, and Parrish. I'd seen them on TV and wanted to see them play. So I knew nobody in Boston, but that's why I moved here. But then I met a guy who worked for Bose Corporation. And long story short, I went to work for Bose. I was one of their first store managers because I'd done retail. I ended up becoming director of retail for Bose. And then that transpired into a speaking and consulting and coaching career that I traveled the world. All this from a college dropout.
Right. Right.
Right. And so what I was able to do was to be able to see that the way that I could work with people and coach with people is that what I had to do is get people to see a different perspective, to see that they had different options. And again, until I kind of wrote the book, I wouldn't say that I was just always asking everyone these what if questions. But what I saw was that everything that happened good in my life, there was this moment of pause, this moment where I didn't go into the automatic response, where I didn't go into the reaction, where I didn't go to the old way of thinking or the old stories that are put in your head by your family or teachers and most important probably is, I went to the stories that I was telling myself or that the person I'm coaching was telling myself. So I came up with what I call the what if rule and it's really just a 3-step. It's pause, question, go. I think this interrupter, this ability to be able to say, give a real example. Like I meet a lot of people who tell themselves, well, or will say, I'm a procrastinator, right? That's their identity. I'm a procrastinator. Well, pause. Well, let's talk about that. What if your identity as a procrastinator is actually getting in the way of you achieving and doing the big things that matter. Right. So, and then pause, question, go. And so the question part is just using the what if to change your perspective and options. It's incredibly simple because I'm a big believer of there's brilliance in simplicity.
One on
I'm not a complicated guy.
right. And there's a lot of power in the pause too.
Mm,
Like it's just to take a moment, right? Just to take a moment to almost not and that you could even unpack that, right? Because if you can pause, be still, and maybe gain a perspective, right? If you could just maybe take a few steps back or imagine yourself like, looking at yourself as a person that you care about. Like this is obviously a little bit deeper, but if you were to take advantage of the pause and time and kind of just, you know, observe too, right? Like pause, hold on a second. Like, and then I think, I'm guilty of it too, right? And I've immediately stepped into that old identity without actually getting a proper observation or an accurate, standpoint from where I'm at, whatever it may be, a decision or an action or a conversation or whatever it is. There's a lot of power in just the pause. Yeah. And so, I mean, simplicity is really where it's at, brother. I mean,
yeah, and let me just I was gonna say is sometimes it's as simple as like someone's tailgating you. I hate being tailgated. Of course, I always think the car in front of me is going too slow, right? So there's two different. But I can either get mad about the car who's tailgating me, and like a friend of mine who hit the brakes and the car ran into him, and the cop gave him the ticket, right? Right.
yeah,
I can blow this whole day up, or I can just say, well, what if the guy behind me is late for work?
right.
What if I just let him pass? I don't need to have this battle. And so sometimes, right, it's as simple as, but your react, I always say my actions don't get me near in the amount of trouble that my reactions do. And so that pause, but it's not just pausing, right? It's about the asking this what if to be able to kind of change your perspective or your options. But just as important is to go, what are you going to do about it? I think a lot of people pause and then they just kind of go right back to what they're doing. And so what actions can I take to change this moment, change this
Sure.
week?
Right. And that there's so much value in reframing, the actions of others, right? To have a little bit of grace and say, like, wait, maybe there's somebody that they know is in the hospital and they got to move, and then being able to do it's so hard though, right? Because we
It
just
really
get so
is.
our vision becomes narrow and short to just whatever the hell we got going in our lives. What do you see with the people that you've worked with, right? You've coached, and I suppose what do you see as some of their biggest challenges when you're kind of proposing like this type of an approach?
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge is the thinking, I think, is that they getting them to see how much more control they have. One of the things I like to say is you can't change anything you don't own, right? You can't change what you don't own. So, if I'm in a relationship and I'm having trouble with a relationship, most of us are going to focus on what that other person is doing. Actually, there's a good example in the book of a woman who she used to drive her crazy because her husband wouldn't close the cupboard doors. And so every time she'd walk in there, she'd get angry at her husband because she had to close the cupboard door. He doesn't respect me, yada, yada, yada. And so, but instead, the transition became, wow, what if every time I close the door, cupboard door, I think about everything he does for me. Right. And so I think people so personalize the things that happen, right? The person who, you know, takes 13 items to the 12 and under grocery store line, right? Right. They're screwing you. Well, they don't even know you, right? But you so personalize it. And so I have to own a friend of mine, Steve, he said something once kind of blew my mind. He goes, and it's so simple. He said, I'm 100% responsible for 50% of every relationship. 100% responsible for 50% of the relationship. So you can't own someone else's half. And right? We spend so much time trying to get people to change. All I can do is own as my half. So, the question was, what's the biggest challenge? I think them getting to see that they own so much more than they know.
Okay. Yeah. So instead of always putting it on the other people or the outside circumstances, what you're proposing is that there is a portion of it that's our responsibility. We own some portion of it, whatever it is. And then to acknowledge that and then pay attention to that, right? Rather than whatever the other person's doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think like, let's just look at the price of groceries. Yeah. It's hard out there for a lot of people. Right. But being so focused on who's out to screw you and big corporations making all this, money and, all that does is is a roadblock to what you need to do. So,
Sure.
right. So what are the things that you control that you can change? And that most important is that you'll do. Right.
Right.
In my consulting days, one of the things that would always frustrate me is I worked with a lot of retailers, and there was always people who said, well, we tried it and it didn't work, or we thought about it. Right. And so the one thing that I've found is the most successful people in life, whether it's business or what have you, are people who take action.
Sure.
And as simple as it sounds, I always say, like, there's 3 doors in your life, and you walk up to the first door, and you it's closed, so you walk away. The second door is it opens, and you walk through. But most people stand in front of door number 3, don't try it, but just stand there and kind of moan and bitch and feel sorry for themselves. And
Sure.
and again, I'm not saying that there aren't times, and everybody has tough times in their life. But it's what can you do with your perspective to move forward with it?
Yeah. And I believe that when a person, and myself included, the more that I think about the outside circumstances and portion that other people do own because they own some too, right? And what you're proposing is that it's mutual, right? And it varies. However, it is a mutual. All of it is. All of it is. Like to go back to the car example, it's like we're both on the road, right? You have a responsibility for your vehicle. I have a responsibility for my vehicle. We both have different goals, but there's a shared responsibility, and that goes for our relationships too. And I find that when I am too closely focused on the other person's portion or the other person's responsibility, I give them all the power. I'm
Absolutely.
handing over all of the power too. So then I don't have that likelihood that I take action because I'm waiting for them to do something. And I'm like, oh, well, they have to fix this and that and this other thing. And then I forego paying attention to whatever I'm responsible for. Anyways, it's a catastrophe because nothing happens. And the more that you do that, the more you give your power away. And the more that you give your power away, the less progress you make, right? And so if you live in that state where it's somebody else's problem or this person always does this to me, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. And if we're talking about traffic or you're talking about your wife or your husband or whatever it is, it destroys progress when you're focused on the other person's portion of their, whatever they may be doing or not doing, right?
Yeah. I mean, imagine if you just, if you break it down and said, well, I ruined my whole day because some car was 2 feet closer to me than I wanted him to be. I mean, when you put it like that, it's absurd, but
So absurd.
it is what happens. I think that one of the things is if you live your life in a way that just says, you know what, if everyone I meet is better for meeting me and not worse for meeting me, then I'm living a good life. And I'm not saying I can achieve that every day with every person. But in the same respects is when that's my goal for the day. And so, so really this whole what if and this whole book is really about just really changing there's always another perspective. You always have options. And I think when you have a good conversation with a friend, they help you find that. Well, what
Right.
if questions can actually help you find it yourself in the moment. So, so for those with about the book, right, is the book is based on 52 different questions that you can ask each week, or you can just go through random. and I'll just do one real fast, right?
Yeah.
So like,
52 questions, one a week. Yeah. Remember
yeah. And
that.
so, number 22, what if this week you practice being a little happier? Now, I
Right.
didn't say be happy, right? It didn't say
Right.
you're not happy. It's just, or what if this week you made sure someone in your life felt truly seen and heard?
Yeah.
Right. And so the questions are just built. And so there's kind of a story or something with the question. And then there's some perspective, like in this particular one, a little section called The Invisible People Right in Front of You, another section called The Gift of Being Present. And so what it allows you to do is just kind of each week stop and pause and kind of look at maybe some of the changes you can make. And the goal of the book is to create the habit of doing this so you can do it in the moment. I was originally going to write a book about the what if rule, pause, question, and go. And then I realized, well, if it's so simple, why would I need a whole book? Right? I should be able to tell you on a one-page sheet how to do
Right.
something you'll really do. And a lot of books are just so over, like, it's 3 sheets of paper created, blown out to a 200-page book.
Sure.
And so what I wanted to create is something that you would actually practice in your life so that you could use it at any time.
Well, and I appreciate that you have some stories attached to them too, because as humans, it's just not always we don't always take it at face value and apply it right away, even if we believe like, oh, that's a good idea. That sounds great. And then but we're rather stubborn. We're rather caught up in our own habitual practices. And so when I think it's very powerful that when we're able to read story after story, example after example, it really lends to how well we can apply it. Seeing and hearing example after example after example, it's like we start to believe it inside our bodies, right? You got to the repetition gets it into our bones rather. And so then it becomes applied much easier. And so I think that that's a pretty smart way to come about it.
Yeah, and look, and it's kind of like what you do on the podcast, right? I mean, it's one thing to be able to say, "Hey, there's life after stop drinking." But when you and your guests share what that life is like,
Sure.
it becomes so much more doable. It's kind of like when you should stop drinking. Well, every time I drink, not every time I drink, but every time there's a problem, I've been drinking, right? And so logically, you maybe need to stop drinking. But when
Right.
you hear the stories of other people in their lives, and, I mean, look, before we had television and all this, right? I mean, it was stories that we passed from generation and from, sitting around a campfire.
Right. Yeah.
And so those are the things that say, hey, this is the life you can have. These are the moments you can have.
And I think that that's what your book is doing is paying attention to those moments a little bit wiser. Right. And
Yeah,
so
maybe a little more proactive.
that too, right? Because I agree with you wholeheartedly that the leaning towards action. Now, don't get me wrong. It's got me into trouble. I pull the trigger first and then figure out what's going on later. I do that more times. I've paid the price that way too, but I am all right with that, right? I feel better about that than not knowing about door 3. I'm like, man, I got to kick that damn thing down one way or another, right?
Yeah, and look, most of the time, the things that keep people from doing things, right? It's stories that they've told themselves or messages that they've got from others. And I think especially for people watching who, right, have put down the drink, have put down the drug, or put down whatever it is that is in their way, you had so many years of thinking and acting in a certain way that you have to take this moment and just say, you know what? I'm going to go do it even out of fear, even though I have that fear. Even if someone is going to make fun of me or my family doesn't believe in me starting this business, right? But it's getting that stuck. I think that's the biggest trouble. I mean, who wants to sober up and then have just a boring kind of life? And for most of us, I sold my boat when I got sober because I knew you couldn't vote and not drink. That was where my mindset was.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I did it eventually, but I was like, well, if I can't drink, why would I own a boat?
Well, what else? So wait, the book isn't out yet, right? It's coming out in January.
Yeah, January 6th, it'll be Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo. It's available. It'll be available both on in Kindle version, any digital version, or in paperback. This is the book cover and
I
all
like
that.
that, man.
Yeah. So this is actually, I have another book that people in recovery would like. Is I wrote this 2 years of book. It's called "The Day Makes the Year Makes a Life," and so this book is really based on principles of recovery applied to business.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So
Now,
this is.
what about your coaching and speaking and stuff like that, man? Are you still rocking and rolling with that stuff too?
Yeah. So, my coach is a little bit different. I like to, and kind of this what if is this pause, question, and go. I like to do a lot of just one session coaching. Hey, whatever. Let's talk about where you're at. Where do you want to achieve? And then what are we going to do? And, I'm not a guy who wants to coach someone for 6 months. You'll get sick of me after 3 months, let alone 6 months. So, the longest I coach people really is for 4 sessions.
Right.
Uh, but what I really help people do is just help them see what are the options and perspectives for them in this moment. And I try to make it affordable because I've had a good life and really love to connect. And look, so many of the stories in the book, right, are from people I've met, whether it's in
Nice.
recovery or also in coaching. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. So.
Well, hey, listen, Doug, I absolutely love it. I love the simplicity. I love the smash and grab approach to some wisdom too, right? Like you're not going to prolong and stretch somebody out over a year. It's like, hey, I'm going to let you know what's going on, and then you gotta let it rip. You got to grip it and rip it, right? So
Grip it
there's a
right.
lot of there's a lot of power in that. And I'm going to have everything outlined for everybody in black and white so they can come and see it, get some eyeballs on your stuff, and then we'll be looking out for that book soon enough. But yeah, man, this has been another episode of the
Yeah,
next
and
Fit.
then go to my website. Hold on one second. Then go to my website, DougFleener.com. Sign up.
Doug
I do a
Fleener.
week, DougFleener.com. I do a weekly newsletter. I actually do a daily email that kind of changes your perspective just a little bit. So
What's it
come
called?
sign up.
The newsletter.
So it's called I have the daily what if and the weekly what if. So it's half business, half personal development. It's always around change and growth.
Sure, man. Awesome. And like I said, I'm gonna have that in black and white so you don't
Appreciate you.
well, everybody will see that loud and clear. And yeah, man. All right. This has been another episode of Next Fix. I truly appreciate your time, Doug. All right, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for having me.